Hello, this video is going to go over the PSU Writing Rubric. In front of me, you will see the homepage for Pittsburgh State University. I am starting at the homepage just so that you know where to find the PSU Writing Rubric. While there's probably a couple different places you can find the rubric, the place that I always go and that I think is easiest is by clicking on the link to the Writing Center. So I'm going to click on that. And if you scroll down, and you'll have to scroll a little bit, especially if you're using a mobile device, but click on rubric. And what I'm going to show you is the long form. We do have an abbreviated form. Both these are shared as PDFs. But let me bring up the long form rubric for you. So here we have the long form. This is a 2-page one. You are free to modify this rubric. You're free to use language from this rubric. You're also free to simply just use this rubric as it is and grade your assignments accordingly. It's meant to work for any kind of writing assignment. I use it for writing assignments in my Writing to Learn courses, but I do modify the language just to fit the assignment needs. So I'm just going to go over the rubric as it is and talk a little bit about each section. So as you're looking at this, you're going to notice 4 columns. One is called exceeds expectations. The second column here is called meets expectations. The third column is falls below expectations. And the final column, the fourth one, is no credit. When a lot of faculty look at this, they immediately will point out we have an A, B, C, D, F scale. And we only have 4 columns here. And so how we usually articulate that, both myself and Dr. Janet Zepernick, is for us, well, maybe Janet doesn't see it this way, but I usually see the exceeds as obviously an A. You know, that's exceptional, great work. Meets expectations for me can be a B or a C. It really depends on how the student has met those needs or goals and not met those needs or goals based upon the assignment. So it really will depend overall on what I saw in that assignment, if it's a B or C. But as we talk about meets expectations for every section, you'll probably start to think of ways that something might be more of a B leaning assignment and something may be more C level for that section. There is a falls below expectations for me. That's clearly mostly a D. Again, somebody may see this slightly differently, but for me, falls below is typically D work. No credit is always an F for me. So I'm just going to go over each section here just to kind of do a quick overview. It starts with focus, goes into development, organization, use of sources, style, and editing. So I'm going to take each of these one by one and talk about them. The first one is focus. And this is just a paper's main purpose or idea. We want to make sure that the paper the student created has an effective thesis statement or some kind of forecasting statement, because not all papers have thesis statements. And we also need to think about topic sentences. You know, do all the topic sentences connect well to the paragraphs that are being developed? And of course, we'll talk about development a little bit more later, but here we're just looking at focus. And focus is more than just a thesis statement. It's also how that paper has taken the thesis statement or whatever forecasting statements they have and, you know, had them consistently throughout that document. It can also be things like topic sentences. Does every paragraph have a clear topic sentence that helps to focus that paragraph? So let's look at some of the language for exceeds expectations, meets, and then maybe falls below for focus. So focus says the paper's purpose or main idea for exceeding expectations is clearly indicated and supported by both content selection and effective use of sentence level structures, such as thesis statement, forecasting statements, and topic sentences, as well as words and phrases that connect the content of individual paragraphs to the overall point of the paragraph section or paper. So again, that's why I was saying that stuff about, this is even about topic sentences for every paragraph. So again, look at your paper, look at the students' work and see how well they do that. If they're exceptional at it throughout the paper, then yes, exceeds expectations. What I'll notice sometimes in my writing to learn courses is yes, there'll be a strong thesis statement. Yes, most of the paper might have some, really strong or good topic sentences, but maybe there's some weaknesses there or it's not very consistent. And for me, that would be meets. Falls below, if I feel like the thesis statement, like even if they have a thesis statement, as we would say, yes, that's a very good thesis statement. But if the paper isn't controlled by that or focused on that in any consistent way, that for me is falls below. Especially if they don't have topic sentences for every paragraph that are really good and bring in concise discussion for the development of that paragraph. No credit for me usually means there's like no thesis statement or discernible forecasting statement. There might not even be an introduction there that's very clear, and there's really no focus. Like I can't find that throughout the essay. So that's a discussion of focus. Development. So for me, this is part of content when I grade papers and think about them. Development is how the student backs up the claims that they're making. So if a student is claiming a certain argument, they of course have to back it up with appropriate evidence and valid reasoning. So they have to have some discussion around that evidence. They just can't, plop in quotes and not talk about them. I remember being an undergrad and taking an English class, and one of my professors was like, never end with a quotation because you want to make sure that you've developed that idea in your own words in some way. And for me, that's how I see development. It's supporting the claims that the student is making in the paper. So I'm going to read you exceeds expectations for development. The paper's claims are supported with appropriate evidence and valid reasoning, and its ideas are elaborated with explanation, demonstration, and/or illustration suited to its audience and purpose. The argument does not include errors of fact or unsupported generalizations. Opinions are clearly distinguished from facts. The paper entirely fulfills the goals of the assignment. So that exceeds. And to be honest, like I don't always see a lot of that in my writing to learn course. And admittedly, I teach a 100 level writing to learn course. So lots of times it's the students, they're freshmen or sophomores and they haven't yet taken a lot of different writing courses. Those, there are times where students have taken quite a few. But as you can see from that exceeds expectations, we have discussions about, the argument does not include errors of fact or unsupported generalization. So think of like in today's society, and they make some claim and then they don't support it. That would be a generalization. And many of us may also hate the phrase in today's society, but that's beside the point. Another thing here is opinions are clearly distinguished from facts. Students will come with a lot of opinions about something, but they will not always back up those opinions with different kind of claims or with other facts or other sources. So, and then this might also be a place where you can talk about the difference between bias and opinion, and kind of help students understand that because we all have biases and we all have opinions and they need to learn to distinguish between those two things. An example of that would be some people have a bias that women are terrible drivers, right? And so that is something that because of background, because of, whatever they've experienced in their past, they just carry that bias with them. So when you're talking about writing in your classes, that might be something to bring up to kind of help students understand some of these things. But to go back to development, what we're looking for here is that students are developing proper reasoning skills, they're supporting their claims with evidence, and that is happening throughout this paper. So look at each section and see, how well the student does it. Do they do it very consistently? Is it very clear that they're always backing up their claims? Do they use sources as ways to back up whatever claims they're making? And so if, you see that consistently and well done, that might be an A or maybe B paper. And of course, if you see something where support for claims is inadequate or superficial or contains significant inaccuracies or information or reasoning, or parts of the assignment are just underdeveloped, that might be a C. So that's a little bit about development. Organization is a bit different from development. And so we've separated these two things. So with development, we're looking at how students support the claims they are making. With organization, we're looking at structure. So let me read you the exceeds expectations for organization. The sequence of ideas effectively supports development of the main idea. Paragraphing shows how ideas are related, and paragraph breaks clearly signal a shift in focus. Both within and between sections and paragraphs, ideas are presented in a logical sequence. The text makes effective use of sentence structures that indicate and support the organization of ideas. So when it comes to organization, some of us, I teach professional and technical writing. We are really influenced by genres in that class. So genres are different types of documents. It might be a memo, it might be a business letter, it might be a proposal, but we know what it is when we look at it. We don't have to read it right away. We can look at that document and say, yes, this is a memo. It contains all the headers and information a memo needs. Or yes, this is a business letter. We've all seen those. We know what they look like. So we expect things from those genres. If a student doesn't meet those genre expectations in my class, then they will fall short for organization. So again, I use parts of this in my technical and professional writing class just because this language around organization is really good in terms of talking about how the document should look. Of course, sometimes when we're working with more academic papers, papers that are research essays, we don't always ask for, a memo format or something. We may ask for something in MLA, APA, but this is going beyond just how an APA or MLA should look in terms of format. This is also asking about how the student has set up that essay. Does it have a clear introduction? Does that introduction help the essay move along? And look at the paragraph breaks. Are there good transitions there? And this even goes back to topic sentences. Do those transitions that the student gives really effectively lead into that topic sentence? So you have that smoothness, if you will, between the paragraphs. Sometimes if you're teaching like a lab report, you may have them meet certain types of organizational expectations with headers like an introduction, methodology, results, analysis, all those different sections. That would be part of your organization. When I have students write memos, for example, or other proposal documents in any kind of technical and professional writing, different ideas need to be grouped into different sections. So again, that's another part of organization. So that's how you can think about that. It isn't really development as much as it is about the structure, the way the essay looks, and how the essay moves through its ideas. On the next page, we're looking at use of sources. So when we think of use of sources, we may just like strictly think citation. And that's what we're talking about here. In part, that's true. We are talking about citation, but we're also talking about how students use the materials that they've either found themselves, or if they're doing primary research, well, I guess found themselves through the work they're doing. So use of sources can also be experiential. It can be anecdotal. Sometimes it really depends on the assignment. So when you see use of sources, be very careful. You want to think about the assignment in question. Some assignments don't ask students to go and find outside sources, but may ask students to bring in some anecdotal or experiential evidence. And that would be an example here. So let's look at some of the language for exceeds expectations. Outside sources are appropriate to the context and clearly support development of the main idea. The writer effectively distinguishes between source material and the writer's own ideas and clearly indicates the provenance of all source material through correct and effective use of a recognized source citation system. The writer remains clearly in control of all content. So some of that language is very geared toward that idea of APA, MLA, Chicago um, source citations. So again, correctness, making sure that, an MLA, if something's in the works cited, it's also in text citation. Those sorts of things, the things that as academics we're all very familiar with. But again, think of the assignment overall. How are students using whatever kind of evidence they have to bring into the paper? And so this may be weighted more or less depending upon things, but just look carefully at this. So let's look at something below exceeds expectations for source material. For what falls below expectations, and this would be the third column we have. Source material is inadequate or inappropriate for the task. Source material is used in an inadequate or ineffective way. The writing shows noticeable loss of control in using source material, or source materials frequently not integrated into the writer's own sentences. So you see a number of errors going on there. You can read through the rest of that on your own, or when you look at this rubric on your own. But if you see quite a few errors there, if you see even a lack of sources is probably going to be, it fails. It's a obviously F grade, especially if you ask for certain sources. But if you're asking for them like peer-reviewed sources and they're using sources from like Wikipedia or something like that, then that might be falls below. We have coming up next, our penultimate section is style. And style just refers to almost like voice. It's like what you expect the paper to sound like in terms of the diction used by the student writer. Are sentences clear? Does things like sentence level make sense overall? So I'm going to read just the exceeds expectations for you. Sentences are clear, effective, and coherent. Vocabulary is broad, and word choice shows attention to the audience, purpose, and context for writing. Word choice, sentence structure, and tone are appropriate for the paper's purpose, audience, and context, and or are appropriate for academic/professional settings. The paper makes consistently effective use of content, area, vocabulary appropriate to the subject. So, an example here for style might be if you want a student to write a document in your own discipline for a professional audience in your field, you're going to want them to use correct vocabulary for that scenario that you give them. And I ask my students in tech and professional writing to do things like this quite often. So there, I'm not really looking for, academies in their writing style. And by the way, some students will try that because they're just so used to it. I'm looking for more understanding the professional diction of the field. I'm looking like if you're in marketing, you know those buzzwords. So that's part of style. But style also considers, well, in that sense, style considers things like the audience and the purpose and the context. But of course, word choice, sentence structure, and tone should also all be appropriate as well. So if you notice some, tripping around with that, then you may give them a B, for style. So, and then finally we have editing. And I suppose when you look at all this, editing is probably the clearer one or one of the clearer parts of this rubric when you just kind of go through. It's really important when it comes, I'm doing the long form rubric just because I think there's a lot more detail here that helps you think through how you can use this rubric and how you can grade from it. So editing, I'll read you exceeds expectations. The paper is nearly free of errors of spelling, grammar, punctuation, and word choice. Formatting follows the guidelines of the assignment, if any, and or the formatting conventions of the discipline, if relevant, and or the formatting conventions of general academic writing. The overall effect is polished and professional. So one important thing about the word choice, or at least, I guess, how we say that first sentence, the paper is nearly free of errors. We don't expect error-free papers. I mean, that's something that, is not always important. What's really important is that the student has an understanding of what goes into editing, that they've taken the time and, if Word has flagged something for a spelling error, they've at least noticed that maybe and, you know, corrected that error. But Word doesn't always notice these things. For example, from and form, Word is not always going to notice that. So just looking through it and making sure the student has or the paper has some considerations of editing that they've, as far as we can tell, it's very, very clean in terms of grammar, spelling, and punctuation. But also involved in here is the formatting. Like, did students follow your instructions for any guidelines you gave about formatting? Do they have the headers or headings that you wanted them to have in it? Is the formatting conventions good for general academic writing? So think about it that way. It's not just spelling and grammar. There's other things here in editing that we need to think about. You could also think about document design here. What kinds of things were you asking for in terms of them designing the document overall? Did they do that? So, for example, when I teach professional and technical writing, part of my editing here is just about the document design. So, again, you can take this language and modify it as you need to for your different assignments. So, I hope that has helped you understand our PSU writing rubric. If you have any questions on this, you may contact me. I'm Jessica Jorgensen Borkert, and I'm sorry, I'm a disembodied voice right now. Or you can also contact the director of the Writing Center, Dr. Janet Zepernick. She had a huge hand in creating this rubric, and so she would be able to certainly answer any questions you have about it. Either way, I hope you find the rubric useful, and I wish you luck in teaching your next Writing to Learn course. Thank you.